Does division always make a number smaller? We know this is true when we divide a whole number by 2, or by 3, or by 4, and so on. But what happens when we divide by a number between 0 and 1? Is the statement still true? Let's do a few questions and see what we discover. What is 1 8/10 divided by 1/10? Well, I like using context to figure things out, so I'm going to think of this in terms of money. Let's see my $1.80 right there. And I need to divide my $1.80. Let's write that down, make sure we've got this. And I want to divide it into groups of 10 cents. Well, if I take my $1.80 and divide them into groups of 10 cents, I've got one group, two groups, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, I need to split that up. Here we go. I took 10 dimes to make the dollar, right? So I've got 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Okay, so when I take $1.80 and divide it into groups of 10 cents, I get 18 of them. So, if I take 1 8/10 and divide it by 1/10, I would also get 18. And 18 is larger than 1 8/10, which is where we started. Well, let's look at this again. Let's think of it instead of, how about 1 8/10 divided by 1/100? Well, in this case, here's my $1.80. And instead, I'm going to divide them by pennies. Well, let's get 180 pennies out. Well, that'd be 1 pile, 2 piles, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get the idea. I'm not going to get 180 pennies out here, but you can see that $1.80 would be 180 pennies. So we can see that 1 8/10 divided by 1/100 would also be 180, which again is a lot larger than what we started with. I'm going to move this money out for a second. I want to see what we've come up with. We've got 1 8/10 divided by 1/10 was 18. And then we did 1 8/10 divided by 100 was 180. Wait a second, I think I'm seeing a bit of a pattern here. I wonder if you could figure out what 1 8/10 divided by 1,000th would be. So in our first two examples, we found that 1 8/10 divided by 1/10 was 18. We also found that 1 8/10 divided by 100th was 180. But in each of these cases, we started with a number. When we divided by a decimal between 0 and 1, we ended up with a number that was greater than the number we started with. I wonder if that's always going to happen when we divide by decimals. Let's see what happens when we divide by a decimal greater than 1. How about this? 1 8/10 divided by 1 2/10. I like this money context here, so let's think about it that way. That would be the same thing as $1.80 divided by $1.20. Well, if I take $1.80, which I have here, and make groups of $1.20, there's one group of $1.20, and here's a group of 60 cents. 60 cents. Well, 60 cents is half of my $1.20. So if I know that, and I know that half can be represented with 5/10 or 0.5, I could think of this as being one group of $1.20 and one group of 60 cents, or 5/10 of $1.20. So I'm going to write that down. I'd have my one whole group of $1.20 and 5/10 of $1.20, because I see that that's half of it. So in this case, we ended up with a number that was smaller than when we started with. We found that this was true. 1 8/10 divided by 1 2/10 was 1 5/10. Let's think of another example to really wrap our heads around this idea. We've looked at it with the money. Now let's look at it with chocolate. Chocolate. Well, if we're dividing 2 chocolate bars into parts that are less than 1 whole, then we'll have more parts than when we started with. Like taking these 2 chocolate bars. If I split them up into 4 pieces each, I started with 2, and I divided into quarters, which we know is 25/100ths, I would end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. And in this case, our answer of 8 is larger than the number we started with, which was 2. So back to our original question. Does division always make a number smaller? No. When we divided by a number between 0 and 1, like we did up here, the answer was greater than the number we divided into. And it happened down here with the chocolate bars too. The number was greater than the number we divided. But over here, when we divided by a number that was greater than 1, the answer was less than what we started with. And I guess that really makes sense. When you take something and divide it into smaller parts, less than a whole, you end up with more of them.